Welcome to the Natural Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Backus, and I'm excited, as always, to have astrologer Emily Trinkaus with me today because we're talking about eclipses. Hey, Emily.
Hi, Christine. So happy to be here. We have a lot to talk about.
Yep, it should be an interesting conversation as always. I wanted to start us off with a little bit of a grounding meditation, and the usual caution I say is that if you're in a car or doing something that requires your attention, just let it wash over you. But if you are somewhere where you can close your eyes or take your gaze down, then I recommend doing that. The energies are pretty swirly at the moment. At least that's how they feel to me. And so let's just get in touch with our physical sensations. So just for a moment, just notice see if you can hold your whole body in your awareness at one time from head to toe without focusing on one particular thing, but sort of allowing your whole physical experience for the moment. Clothes against the skin, air against the skin, energy and emotion. If there's agitation or calmness, or if you're like me and you just want to go to sleep, could be any of those things or all of them at once. But just notice your physical experience for a moment and allow everything to relax to the extent possible. Feet relaxing against the floor, the seat against the chair. Maybe the shoulders can relax just a teeny bit more, the jaw and the tongue and the face. And then allow yourself to notice your breathing for a few breaths. Just notice that you're breathing. If you feel like taking some extra deep breaths, you can do that. Otherwise, just notice that the breath does its own thing. And sometimes the breath gets deeper just when you kind of allow it to do what it wants. And just notice that you are connected to the earth and you're connected to the whole cosmos through your breath. And just allow yourself to feel held and keep that sense of connection as we take off into our conversation. And thank you again, everybody who's here live, as well as all of you who are listening now or another now in the future. And with that, I guess we will take off. And Emily, I know you just did a whole forecast episode for somebody, so you might be kind of primed. But I know we wanted to at least start with, well, actually, let's just start with today because today is the Mercury Cazimi, the Mercury and Sun conjunction. So and before we got on, we kind of mentioned the tech glitches, and I'll just point out that at least what I was able to pick up from doing a little research is that the reason my cell coverage isn't working is I think Verizon's out across the country right now, which is quite a literal example of Mercury being so involved with this eclipse.
Right. So we have that Mercury Sun precise conjunction today, leading up to the eclipse on October 2nd, which will also be conjunct Mercury. In other words, Mercury will still be close enough to the Sun at the time of the eclipse. So Mercury is being eclipsed, and Mercury is the planet of connection, communication, technology. So yes, Christine and I have both been noticing some Mercury issues happening, maybe some of you as well, but we can think about this. I mean, in terms of today's Cazimi, this could be some new insights, perspectives. I really think in terms of this eclipse coming up, which is in Libra, and so of course the Mercury Sun conjunction today is in Libra. Libra is the sign of relationships. And so this Mercury activation, this could be a whole new perspective on a relationship, on some relationship challenge maybe or issue. Um, some new information coming in. And I think, today is in a sense a kind of preview or already getting us started with this eclipse energy. Certainly we're already in the the field of this eclipse, since it's just 2 days away. Yeah, we're getting a big preview of Mercury themes and issues that will be activated by the eclipse or further activated.
Yeah, and I get the sense, and too, and you can let me know what you think of this, but I get the sense that it's almost like with Mercury eclipsed, as you put it, it's like there's stuff that's going to be hidden for the moment, that's going to be very unclear for the moment, and even, I don't know, even secrets or something that over the next week or so will start to emerge. Do you get that sense as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much happening beneath the surface here in Eclipseville, and as we know, this is a whole 6-week eclipse season that started with a Virgo new moon on September 2nd, I believe, and goes until the Aries full moon, and what a full moon that is, on October 17th. And so eclipse season tends to be a pretty mysterious time. On the one hand, there's a lot that's developing beneath the surface, and there are revelations along the way and big turning points along the way. And there's still a lot that's submerged. And, eclipses are not one-day events. They're just, this is initiating a new cycle that's going to last for 19 years, but especially over the next 6 months, we'll start to come into activity or fruition. And this eclipse being on the South Node, this eclipse is so much about the past and about completions, endings. Yes, it's a solar eclipse, an extra powerful new moon, so there is that seed planting quality, but there's a lot to be let go of, released. This can be a big emotional release happening, especially with Venus and Scorpio, as we can talk about, and Mars in Cancer, a lot of water energy. Also interesting considering what's happening in the world. We had the first eclipse was in Pisces, conjunct Neptune, water everywhere. And indeed, in the world, we're seeing flooding, pretty terrible situations in some places with water. And the water element continues to be strong through this next eclipse as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 19 years and 6 months, so I think it's always helpful to let people know to look back if you're old enough and it's in your awareness to look back 19 years to essentially the same date, October 2nd, and that was what 2005, I think, was the year.
Yes, yes.
So you can remember what was going on for you at that time, and if you had a new beginning.
Right, and maybe there's something closing out that got started in 2005. In other words, we're completing that cycle, that eclipse cycle that started with the solar eclipse on October 2nd, 2005. And then, yeah, planting seeds for the next 19 years, but also closing out. And, sometimes this is very literal in terms of a big breakup or divorce. Of course, again, the focus is relationships, but this can also be about relationship patterns, ways that we're relating, and with Mercury involved, a lot about our stories about our relationships and our past relationships and our old relating dynamics, and can we get a whole new perspective on that? Can we change the story?
Yeah, a whole new way of seeing things, right? That's what it feels like. And the other thing I wanted to point out too is that we're, as you point out, the 6 month period. I mean, 6 months ago, essentially we had the Aries solar eclipse, the big one, right? The big one for the US, the total one. And we're coming into the end of that 6 month cycle. And that's another place to look back to, is like what's been happening over this last 6 months, because that one feels very relevant for me personally, but also I think just given what's going on in the world, it's a lot has changed in 6 months. It's pretty dramatic.
A lot has changed. And just to mention that we also had a lunar eclipse in Libra before that solar eclipse. And this is our last Libra eclipse in this Aries Libra cycle. We'll have another Aries eclipse next spring, another Aries solar eclipse, but this is our last one in Libra. And then we're shifting into Virgo Pisces, since the nodes will shift into Virgo Pisces next year. So in that sense, I mean, there's so many indicators of completion right now, completion and endings. Okay, it's our final eclipse in Libra. It's the South Node eclipse, release, endings, and we've got the last hurrah of Pluto in Capricorn this fall between September 1st and November 18th, 19th. So that's a big completion, a completion of the cycle that started in 2008 when Pluto first moved into Capricorn.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about Pluto and Capricorn, but let's just kind of recap some Aries and Libra themes besides what you've been talking about, because I think it's such an interesting axis of the zodiac. Aries, that first sign, Libra, the seventh sign, Aries, so much about what I want, what I desire. My sort of like my what's the word I'm looking for? Like not so much my reason for being, but the fact that I want to be, right? My becoming myself. And then Libra, how I understand my relationship, not just with other people, but with everything and everyone. And it seems like to me, there's been a lot, and this is what I've been noticing too, about learning to really own what you want without imposing it on other people. That seems like one of the key issues we've been working with for the last year and a half. That, of course, as you say, with the nodes transitioning at the end of the year, the themes switch.
Right. And I think it's interesting too. I mean, I want to bring Pluto into this because Capricorn, Pluto and Capricorn, that's a sign that naturally squares Aries and Libra. So as we've been doing this Aries Libra dance, as Pluto is in its last hurrah of Capricorn, that's, and the full moon coming up, the full moon of this cycle on October 17th in Aries with the sun in Libra, moon in Aries, will be squaring Pluto and Capricorn. So Pluto is part of this Aries Libra story. So yeah, Aries Libra, this is the self other axis, right? And as you're saying, in terms of Aries, and this is where the North Node is. So this is what we want to lean into, the sign of the self. But it's like what really drives us, what really motivates us, what really gets us going. Aries has a lot of energy. It's the activator. It starts the whole zodiac. So it's like tuning into what's my drive? What's driving me? What do I like? What do I really care about? What do I really get inspired by? What am I really passionate about? And then with Libra, and particularly with the South Node in Libra, it's like, what are other people reflecting for us? What are we projecting onto other people? I'll give an example of this just the other day. So, as I mentioned before we started the recording, my friend Tim and I just started a dance, an ecstatic dance here. And when we were talking about promoting it, Tim is on Facebook, I'm not. So I'm like, okay, you need to write a Facebook post. And what came up for him was, well, what will people think? What will people think? He had some, fear or insecurity about that. And I was like, okay, well, what happens if people judge you because you're doing a dance? Then what? Then what's the bet? Well, yeah, then people won't like me and they'll judge me. And I'm like, okay, so then what happens? Right? And then what? Like, what's the terrible thing? I don't know. Oh, I guess I don't really care what other people think. And I made the point, like, if someone is judging you for dancing, like, we don't like those people anyway. They're idiots, right? So this is, and it was just so Aries Libra, right? Aries, here's what I want to do. Here's what I'm excited about. What will other people think? They won't like me. They'll judge me. Okay, but what's really going on here? We're judging ourselves. We're just making up stories. We're projecting our own fears and insecurities onto other people. Aries Libra. So this is a time when we can really learn a lot from our projections if we're willing to just follow it through and not actually leave it at people won't like me. Like, is that true? Where is that really coming from? I know all of us can have that fear of what other people think, but the truth is most people are just thinking, we're just thinking about ourselves, right? We don't really spend that much time thinking about everybody else. hopefully.
And if
Um,
we are thinking about other people, it's because we're projecting our stuff onto them and making them the bad guy, so we don't have to be that. Yeah.
exactly. And to tie this into Pluto and Capricorn, I feel like so much of what Pluto and Capricorn is about is really committing to our mission, like what I'm here to do in the world, committing to taking power. And I'll just say, for me, like, I feel like dance is my real job. Like, dance is when I feel like I'm most myself. So for me, it feels very, end of Pluto and Capricorn to be like, okay, damn it, I'm going to offer this dance. No one else is doing it in my area. It's time for me to step up, Pluto and Capricorn, right? There can be I was definitely in my Libra shadow of why isn't anybody offering this? I want someone else to do it so I can go do what I love. And it's like, oh shit, all right, I have to do it. I have to make it happen myself, damn it, Aries, right? Take that risk of stepping out and being the leader. So, so again, tying this in with Pluto and Capricorn about power and authority. Libra to Capricorn, where am I projecting my power and authority onto other people? Where am I waiting? Libra is the pause, the stasis, the standstill. Where am I waiting for somebody else to step into their power? Versus North Node in Aries. It's up to me. It's up to me to do it. Um, so this is really, yeah, bringing us in touch with our inner leader. I mean, I think Aries and Capricorn both relate to leadership, right? Taking power. Aries is our personal power, the power of the individual. Of course, I think we're very much conditioned to think that the individual has no power and that nothing that we do in our moment by moment lives will make any difference. So why do anything, right? That's very shadow Capricorn Aries, like the victim and the helplessness and the whole world's such a mess. There's no point in doing anything.
Well, and I think I've said this on probably every time you and I've met, as well as everything else I've done right now, is that there's such a, I guess, just to be dramatic about it, there's so much brainwashing about power and what it really is. And it's so distorted in our culture right now that we get afraid of power because we think power is always bad, right? Power equals control and destruction of something, someone else. And Pluto's a great example of that, right? It's a very destructive energy, and it really has to do with the power that comes. In fact, somebody used it the other day about divine desire, I think is what they said. So you could think of it as divine power, the power that comes from your soul. And real power is a creative force. Real power is the ability to be in conversation with life and other people to create something that's more beneficial and beautiful for the world. That's real power, but that's not what we're taught right now. And it doesn't seem to have a lot of understanding in the mainstream, and it's up to us to reclaim it. And I really think that's part of this last hurrah of Pluto. And yeah, I think that's a lot of what we've been learning. And especially when you get Pluto squaring an eclipse like we have, coming up again.
Well, and thinking about again going back to Libra Capricorn in a square and speaking to what you mentioned earlier about controlling other people, right? So we project our stuff onto other people. We don't like what they're reflecting back, so then we want to control them to stop that, right? Instead of just like taking out the middleman and going straight to Aries, straight to myself. Okay, if this is what is coming back at me through other people, is these are my mirrors, this is what's being reflected, there must be something inside me that's calling that forth. So yeah, so maybe we can think about Pluto and Capricorn as destroying the false or fear-based version of power, which would be the control, right? And I think, I think that we are intentionally conditioned to see power as scary and dangerous, so we don't take our power. So we stay in helplessness and fear.
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, and then we're all trying to control each other instead of understanding what we have this incredible capacity to do as human beings.
Right. And like you said, true power is creative, it's generative, right? So what are we, yeah, and I think Pluto and Capricorn wanting us to really create our mission, our destiny, our, yes, Capricorn is career and it can have something to do with that. And certainly I've noticed since 2008, a hell of a lot of people changing careers, transitioning out of, the gig I was doing just for money to step into my real work, right? That's part of Pluto and Capricorn. But then we can think about the bigger version of Capricorn, which is really like, who am I here to be in the world? What is my bigger role in society? What is my social responsibility? What is my responsibility to the world? And I like to think that we all do have a responsibility to fulfill our unique mission because we need each of us doing our specific thing to add up to the whole.
Well, and I always go back to the shamanic astrology people and how they talk about Capricorn as earth wisdom, and that mature wisdom of the elders before we turn them into the elderly, right?
Right.
There's that heritage in there as well. That's what we have, like our power of lineage that still survives when we look for it.
Yeah, I think it's both the power of our ancestors and those who came before us, and then it's also the power of thinking about the next 7 generations and what happens if I don't do my part? What happens if I don't step into my mission and my destiny? Aren't I kind of letting down or, not living up to the future generations?
Yeah. Yeah, and the last thing I think about, well, maybe it's not the last thing, but one other thing I think about, it's kind of a meaning of Pluto and Capricorn at the 29th degree, right? That's where it is. It's at that culmination point of the sign. I wonder if we're finally exposing and composting tyranny, because it's somebody referred to these last couple of degrees of Capricorn as the dictator degrees. I can't remember
Mhm.
who said that, but looking around the world and particularly even the election stuff in the country, there's so much of that tyrant energy and projection. No matter who or what you think about who the good guys are, right? You're projecting some evil onto the other guys. And it's really interesting to try to step back and watch it.
And it's interesting too, thinking about Libra as the sign of politics.
Yes.
Right? Um, yeah, and how much gets projected onto these politicians, and people get so emotionally invested. And again, here's an opportunity. What am I, whether it's hating or loving, whatever figure out there, what does that really say about me? And is voting the most powerful thing we can really be doing for the world?
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying vote, don't vote, but I'm just saying, like, there are a lot of people who think that, well, I'm voting, so that's all I need to do. Where it's like, we vote every fucking minute of the day. We're voting with our energy and our attention, our thoughts, our feelings, like that, and our money. I mean, how we spend our money is a hell of a lot more important than who we vote for in a poll. We're voting every time we spend money. What are we voting for?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that actually brings me back to a Mercury, with Mercury so involved in this eclipse. Mercury has to do with where we're putting our attention,
Yeah.
right? So if we're getting sort of a chance to reframe and refocus our attention, which we did during Mercury retrograde, but with this eclipse, it's like putting a fine point on what are you feeding with what you're looking at.
Right. And with Mercury in Libra, again, at this Libra South Node eclipse, the energetic drain of over focusing on other people. What are
Yeah.
they doing? Comparing ourselves to other people or getting all emotionally invested in other people's lives instead of our own lives. I mean, where again, coming back to power, it's like, where do we actually have power? I would, of course, a part of me would love it if I could control other people and get them to do what I wanted them to do. That has never worked, unfortunately. So that's not, I don't have any power there. There's no power in trying to change what you're doing to make me feel better. Ain't gonna happen.
And it is, yes, and you're so right. It's so draining to be so focused on what do other people think and what it's that and also, I think about with Libra too, that focus on how do I look, how do I come across, it's like an external view of myself rather than that sort of pure expression of who I am.
Which I think, ties so much into technology and even having this conversation on Zoom where I can see myself, whereas in real life, I'm not constantly looking, how am I looking, right? How's my hair? Um, and I think this ties into, again, with the square to Capricorn, where if Pluto and Capricorn is about living our mission, going for it, taking risks in the direction of our destiny, but Libra, like, does it look good to other people? Does it look beautiful? It might be a mess. It might be messy, right? And I think with Saturn, the dispositor of
Yeah.
Pluto and Capricorn in Pisces, things have been very messy. I'm speaking from experience here, but like, oops, I spaced that, or oh, this is not quite perfect. It's not going to be perfect, and it doesn't have to look perfect. Again, we want to lean into that Aries North Node. How does it feel? How alive do we feel? How energized do we feel? How excited about our day do we feel when we wake up? That's Aries, not like, I wonder how it looked, how beautiful does my life look to everybody on the outside? Which is, again, what, with social media, we're conditioned to like take a picture, make it look good, make everyone else think that our lives are so beautiful and amazing.
Yes. Yep. Well, this seems like a good time to bring in what's coming up with Mars and Pluto.
Well,
Yeah.
let's bring in Mars first, because Mars is very active at this eclipse. This
Do
eclipse is squaring Mars.
you want to see the
And
chart?
sure, if you want to, yeah, if you want to bring it up.
Let me put the chart up and okay, if I can do that. Oops, that's not what I want. I want this. There we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. If you can see it, then everybody else can see it.
Okay, so do you want to point out Mars here in our eclipse?
Yeah, here's Mars down here at the bottom, the little
Yeah,
masculine symbol.
and the red line going over to the south node, moon and sun, and Mercury in Libra. So Mars is squaring this eclipse, Mars in Cancer. Mars is also in a grand trine with Venus and Saturn, which we'll talk about too. But you know, Mars is going to be in Cancer for a very long time. Mars typically spends about 2 months in a sign. It's going to spend about 6 months in Cancer because of its upcoming retrograde. So Mars goes into its retrograde shadow, meaning we start to feel the influence. The influence being a major slowdown, since Mars is about action and direction and forward movement. Mars retrograde comes in, it's like, I don't know what I want or where I'm going, and everything needs to slow down. So Mars goes into its retrograde shadow at 17 degrees of Cancer. So it's almost there at the eclipse. And it will officially go into its shadow October 6th, just after the eclipse. And it doesn't come out of shadow. I was thinking the end of April, and then I looked at my ephemeris again this morning. It's actually like May 2nd or something
Oh
next
gosh.
year.
Okay.
And we have a Venus retrograde coming in March, and retro city. So Mars in Cancer, this is not Mars's favorite place to be. Mars's favorite place to be is in Capricorn, the opposite sign. And you can think about it like Cancer, that's Cancer's ruled by the moon. It's sensitive and vulnerable. It's our feelings, it's our home life, it's our family, our foundation, sense of safety and security. And here's Mars blundering into our peaceful, soft, and squishy environment. Mars and Cancer can stir up conflicts in families, can bring up a lot from the past, not only because Mars is going retrograde, past, but also because Cancer is the sign of past, and specifically family past and memory, earliest childhood experiences. So Mars in Cancer is really stirring up a lot of feelings and also a lot from the past. And then here it is squaring the eclipse. So if we think about this Libra eclipse as having a lot to do with relationships, relationship dynamics, relationship patterns. There's something to release here, something to rethink, to see in a new light. And Mars in Cancer is involved with this. This could put a special focus on family relationships and family dynamics. And also to think about like what's getting triggered probably has nothing to do with present time. It's, there's something, this can be our insecurities. Cancer is a sign of security and insecurity. This could be, fears and insecurities getting stirred up based on early childhood experiences, having nothing to do with whoever is, playing the trigger person in our lives at present. Do you want to
I was
chime
just
in
going
with
to
anything?
say it also, the thought about family, if we use a less rigid definition of family, this is also tribalism, right? Who's in my tribe? And again, I think about the political system. I mean, there's a lot of people kind of defining their tribes, and so
Right.
there's that. I think that piece of this and that volatility of Mars comes into that as well with what's going on.
That's a really good point. And I think at the eclipse, I'm just thinking about the US chart, which is a Cancer, which I think the sun of the US is right around 15 degrees Cancer.
I'd have to
Isn't
look at
it
it. I can't
July
remember.
4th? Anyway, it's,
It would
yeah,
be close. It would be close in any case.
yeah. So yeah, that's a really good point. And again, yeah, tribal politics, Cancer plus Libra. So, and the nice thing is at the eclipse, as I mentioned, there's this grand trine. You want to, I'm like pointing it out, which of course no one can see, but yeah.
Yeah, so here's Mars in Cancer, Venus in Scorpio, and Saturn in Pisces.
So let's talk about Venus since we hadn't mentioned her yet, and she is the goddess of this eclipse as the ruler of Libra, and she's in Scorpio. So Venus is also not in her happy place. Her happy place is in Taurus, the sign opposite. She's in Mars's sign. She's in, Mars's house, not so comfortable, and the gift or some gifts of Venus and Scorpio are the willingness to dive deep and to look at the hard things, right? And to, dig in to get to the root of what's really going on here. Where Libra, the sign, can have a tendency to stay more surfacey, right? But Venus and Scorpio is like, we're going in. We're going all the way in and feeling the feelings that need to be felt. And there could be some underlying pain here that wants to be released. And it's also kind of cool that while Venus is in Mars's sign of Scorpio, she is in harmony with Mars. So it's like, okay, maybe she's not so comfortable in that sign, but Mars has her back. There's some support here from Mars. And with these planets in the water signs, this is really facilitating the flow. Like if this eclipse is about a big release, South Node, what are we flushing out or cleansing or purifying? This grand trine in water is like, yes, there's some really good flow here, and Mars bringing the courage and the strength to go deep, and Saturn bringing some stability or maybe the right kind of container to do this work. And also Saturn is about long lasting results. Like we can really get some traction here to move through hard stuff, hard feelings, hard stuff coming up from the past. But it's like we have the possibility to work through that. These planets are really supporting that process.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. Um, yeah, and there's that whole, I mean, the other thing that keeps coming to me too, partly because of where Mercury is and that it's an eclipse anyway, is that it's a time to really lean into intuition, right? Because our rational faculties are being eclipsed for the moment. And so I think the clues on this new view, the clues on the new perspective are going to come from that emotional, energetic realm, the water realm.
I think that's a really good point because I feel like part of Mercury being part of this eclipse is, Libra's an air sign, the mind. Mercury in Libra wants to weigh it. Is it this? Is it that? What do you think? What do you think? Weigh it out endlessly. And it can really go crazy mind, which is possible at this eclipse, or something to watch for. And Aries North Node, ruled by Mars and Cancer, our instincts are really where it's at, or what's going to help guide us forward is more of that instinctual energy. And even, Venus being in Scorpio, Mars's other sign, you know, really feeling for where's the aliveness? Where's, like, yes, something's ending. We're also, again, planting seeds for the next 19 years. So we want to feel into, well, what is firing me up right now? What do I feel passionate about? And that, what's not working anymore, what's not going to be moved, it was not going to support me moving forward. That's what we're flushing out with this water energy.
I like the flushing out idea. Yeah. Well, and we also have, I mean, there's that intensity of having two planets essentially stationing at the same time as the eclipse. I mean, within a week.
Right. Yeah.
Do you want to talk? And I'm thinking about Jupiter partly because, well, because it's Jupiter, right? How can you not think about Jupiter? And then of course, Jupiter stations on the 9th to go retrograde. Pluto stations on the 11th to go direct. And I think one of the unique things too is that there's so much retrograde energy. And the other thing to point out, and that I'm sure you'll talk about when we talk more about the Mars retrograde, is that Mars is a very rare retrograde. It's the most rare of all of them. So the fact
Right.
that it's spending so much time focusing on these points in the chart is something to really pay attention to.
Right. So the gist here with Jupiter going retrograde October 9th, Mars coming into its retrograde shadow October 6th, the gist here is slow down ahead. And Jupiter in Gemini, right? Jupiter is the planet of expansion, and Jupiter in Gemini can be kind of all over the place. There's so many opportunities, there's so many things we could do. Is it this, is that? And I just went through a very personal experience. Jupiter is stationing right on my ascendant, 21 Gemini. And again, I'll bring in my friend. He and I, there's a studio available. We were thinking about renting it for him to do Aikido and me to do dance. And I got really excited about it. And this came in right on the Pisces lunar eclipse. That this opportunity came in. We went to look at it. We were thinking about it, and then thankfully we were both on the same page. We're like, this feels like too much, right? And I was also thinking about the astrology and thinking like, yeah, I've already made a big expansion. I've moved into a bigger home, and I'm doing more writing workshops. Jupiter and Gemini, like I've already done my big expansion, and this is where we don't want to overdo because Jupiter going retrograde, Mars in its retro shadow, it's going to be a pulling back of energy and a very big slowdown. So being careful not to overexpand at this time. However, I've really considered that studio as a dream seed for the future. And with all of this slowdown coming, all of this retrograde energy coming early next year. Yeah, so Mars officially turns retrograde December 5th and is retrograde until February 24th. And again, in the shadow until May, and then Venus also going retrograde at the end of winter. It's like really good to think about the future right now in terms of setting yourself up for what you want to launch next spring, doing the preparation, doing the inner work, the inner preparation, because this is, the next 6 months or so, it's just not time for the brand new thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's actually a helpful reframe for me because one of the things I've been focusing on since I've still got the chart up is the fact that Saturn and Neptune are going to slowly start coming together until the big conjunction, their conjunction in 2026. And this is the planet of reality meeting up with the planet of imagination and dreams and spirituality and that connection with, the field. And and that's a big momentous thing. And it sort of caps off like a 7-year period of major change that started with Saturn Pluto in 2020 that and we all know how that felt. And so I think I've just got a springboard off this because I hadn't thought about it like that. But all this retrograde energy and sort of this closing out of cycles with the eclipses right now, and the shifting of the nodal axis so that we're dealing with Virgo Pisces for the most part next year. It's like it really is sort of a big culmination and a time to lean into what do I want? What dream do I want to create? What's the utopian version of the future that I want to see in preparation for starting to really make movement towards it as planets start turning forward again? Well, I think it's April. There's a month or two where we get all planets moving direct again, but it's not until April or May. And I can't remember, I just don't have it. I know you've got your ephemeris. It's probably a little easier to look.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Well, hmm. Oh, oops, I'm looking at the wrong. Oh, I don't have my 2025. Sorry. I was looking at my 2024. I'm like, no.
Yeah,
So
because
yeah, don't have that handy.
it's a much more narrow window than we've had the last few years. The last few years, we've had 3 or 4 months of direct energy. And now, with both Mars and Venus doing both of them, the more rare retrogrades, kind of on top of everything else, there's a shorter window. So, a longer time to be incubating is maybe the word, incubating and brooding on what do you really want.
Right. I mean, and even thinking about that Saturn in Pisces, and yes, Saturn goes into Aries briefly next year, but then goes back into Pisces. Pisces being the last sign. That's the end of a cycle. Saturn going into Aries, Neptune going into Aries. Yeah, big rebirth. And there's a lot to do to prepare for that rebirth. And I think we're not so skilled or educated in this culture when it comes to the completions and closing out consciously and preparation. It's more like we just want the instant like jump into the new thing, but
Onto
we're
the
getting, like you're saying, we're getting this long lead time that we could be using very productively, especially on the inner. And I just want to share what Catherine wrote in the chat because I love what she said here. With all of these retrogrades, I suddenly got the image of being in a cleansing bath in a spa where I can let go of the old and come out new. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yes, I like that too, because I'm not sure that it always feels like that. And yeah. And I think I shared with you before we started that I'm going to go ahead and stop the share of the chart. Unless you wanted to look at more, I can leave it up. But I was going to
No,
say,
that's great. I think that's good for the eclipse.
um, it has felt like a very, well, there's a little bit of a time because of Pluto, and this is my personal experience, perhaps with the Pluto placement. But there's a lot of darkness right now and a lot of sort of feeling constricted and all the uncertainty that we've been talking about for a couple of years. And with all the things that we just mentioned, this kind of period of coming inward and really focusing on what we want to create, it's also a time to remember that I hate to quote something very trite, but that whole it's always darkest before the dawn. And there
Yeah.
is a real sense of going into the soup and not knowing how we're going to come out. And I think that Saturn Neptune, while it's not going to be all, what do they call rain? It's not going to be rainbows and unicorns necessarily, but that's not until 2026 where we get that new shift. Um, yeah, yeah, and I just might just want to think about 4 or 5 other things, including all this, just the relationship of all the outer planets right now, which we didn't look at in the chart specifically, but Uranus, Neptune, Pluto are in this really interesting alignment right there. It's 2 sextiles and a trine, and they're all in the very, very last degrees of feminine signs, earth signs, water signs. And it is kind of, it's another signal to a big ending, and and a big release, and we don't know where we're going and where we're going to end up yet. And so again, my sort of the drum I'm beating at the moment is, yeah, we don't know, and it's really important for you to be, all of us, to be focused on what we want rather than feeding all the, oh, things are horrible, the world's going to hell, blah, 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 sort of thing.
Well, and also thinking about, okay, all these, like you said, all these planets, these outer planets in the feminine signs, this is about the inner. And I
Yeah.
think, yes, focusing on the dream, Neptune and Pisces, and knowing our power, Pluto, to create the dream, and that Uranus, things can change really quickly, right? And unexpectedly. So whatever, Pluto at the end of Capricorn, I know when we talked before we started the recording, you mentioned the word despair. And
Yeah.
yeah, and as you just recently said, like the darkness, right? Pluto and Capricorn can feel very dark, right? At the
Yep.
end, it feels extreme. Capricorn being the sign of winter solstice, the darkest time of year, right? Can feel very dark. And I think, partly, yeah, there's the focus, the on what we want to create, on the new dream. And I think part of the preparation is also feeling, just like letting ourselves feel the grief and despair and the WTF and the what, the just really letting ourselves feel it to heal it, right? To support that cleansing process. I've been thinking about these 3 outer planets in cooperation as their final group hug before they move on, or final high five before they all move on into the masculine signs. Um, and there is some support here in terms of tuning into the bigger picture. And I think especially, I mean, it gets interesting later in October, toward the end of October. Mercury is interacting with all 3 outer planets and sort of bringing it down to a more personal level. And we can, if we, do you want to expand into like the various Pluto activations coming this fall, leading
Sure.
up to its
Yeah.
transition?
Yeah.
Okay, so Pluto stationing. Let's come back to the Pluto station. On October 11th, Pluto moving from retrograde to forward. This is a very big deal. When Pluto stations, we're all feeling that Plutonian energy, which again could be the darkness and despair. That could be part of it. We get a big dose of Pluto as it stations. And what's wild is that as Pluto stations, the moon is
Right
right
there.
there with Pluto.
Yeah.
So, Pluto, yes, it's far away, it's a transpersonal planet, but the moon is as personal as you can get. So I think we'll be feeling this station very personally. And also, it's that sense of like, what's in terms of what's happening in the world, Pluto and Capricorn, how does that affect me personally, or what's my personal role? Or, I need to process my feelings about that, right? It really brings it home in a very powerful way. So we have that big activation of Pluto. And then, as we mentioned, the Aries full moon on October 17th is squaring Pluto. Oh, here we go again. And here's where, then we're in our final month of Pluto in Capricorn. But wait, there's more. There's also, as Mars is limping along in Cancer, Mars is, as it's in its shadow, it's already moving extremely slowly. Mars is going to get up to 29 degrees of
Yeah.
Cancer and be exactly opposite Pluto And since Mars will be moving so slowly, and of course Pluto moves like a glacier, that opposition, it's exact on November 3rd, like exact to the minute, but it's exact by degree for like a week, or maybe 2 weeks altogether. Like it's very, very powerful. And Mars Pluto is it's a volatile energy. I think, Mars in Cancer tends not to be so volatile, but it's more like the crabby and the cranky and the frustrated, which could build to a rah. So that the end of October, very extreme astrology, and the new moon in Scorpio comes in while that Mars Pluto opposition is peaking. The new moon in Scorpio is November 1st. Oh, right on Holomas, right? Day of the Dead. The veil is thin. Very extreme energies. And with that extremeness, is that even a word? There's also a potential for really breaking through, for really, breaking through some old, cancer, like old shiznit from the past that we need to clear, breaking through some old insecurities so we can step into our Pluto and Capricorn assignment. I mean, I think part of what's hard with Mars and Cancer is this is where we can really be in touch with our, I'll say it's hard and can also be a gift, but Cancer is like the inner child. And Cancer is the part like, I don't feel like it. I don't feel like doing that, right? Capricorn is like, this is what's necessary. This is what must be done. This is your mission. This is your assignment. This is what you came here to do. Mars and Cancer, I don't feel like it. I'm not in the mood, which is really maybe more of our insecurities coming up and our fears and our past experiences and my family shiznit and blah, blah, blah. So really an opportunity to break through what is getting in the way of stepping up and stepping into more of our power, Pluto. This is a very big last hurrah of Pluto and Capricorn.
Yeah, and I'm also getting the image, what I've seen with people, especially with Mars and Cancer, is there's a real sort of defender, like the defender of the underdog, or the defender of the family, or the defender of the children, right? Or the defender of the tribe, if I would go back to some of that. So there's like this real, yeah, like this defender energy opposite this like very intense power energy. So, and that's, in some ways, that's kind of what we're set up for, I think both personally and collectively right now, is this idea that I'm defending something defenseless, and that's contributing to some of the tyrannical energies as well, right? It's that self-righteous, I'm standing up for what's right and good, and that projection of evil onto the other that we talked about. And it's almost like it's coming to a head, but not just once, but once in Cancer Capricorn.
Right. And as Bobby points out, this is leading up to the US election where energy is already supercharged and super volatile. And I think that's what you just said about Mars and Cancer as the defender. I'm also thinking about that in the more positive light, in the sense that, again, if I'm thinking about the children of the future,
Yep.
right, and how I want to care for them and protect them, Mars and Cancer is like mama bear energy, right? And maybe that can inspire me to do the hard thing that Pluto and Capricorn is asking me to do in terms of stepping into my power.
Yeah, and absolutely, I didn't mean it as a negative. I mean, it cuts both ways, right? It's whether
Right.
it's conscious or unconscious, and that is one of the main themes, at least in some parts of the election right now, is the defense of children's health,
Right.
right? And human health and Americans' health, but that's a big piece of it.
Yeah,
Um,
and just on the defensive, just important to say too, this is a time when we can be feeling very defensive. And, ideally, Cancer's the crab, right? The hard outer shell. So we can go into, Mars, Pluto, we can feel so sensitive and that we can go into more of that distorted shadow expression of Cancer, which has the closed heart. And I need to protect myself from this harsh world, versus really the higher expression of Mars and Cancer, the courage
Right.
to meet the challenges of these times and this world in our lives with an open, vulnerable heart. Ah,
And
not an easy assignment, but that's going to take us where we want to go versus the defending. But being, yeah, this could be a time when people get very defensive and overreact, and you say the slightest thing and they freak out, or we freak out, right? It's time to watch out for that super defensiveness.
well, and I think it goes back to the power versus control, right? I mean, because no matter how wonderful your intentions are, that's how we get tyranny, is people think that they're right and they have to make the good decisions for everybody else, and because they have to be in control. And that's so much of what we're up against right now. And remembering that that vulnerability is part of power.
Right.
Right? True power has an aspect of vulnerability because you can't not be vulnerable.
Which I think is kind of cool about Mars being in Cancer during Pluto's last hurrah in Capricorn,
Yeah.
because as we know, Pluto is where the energies can be extreme and where we can overdo, right? Pluto overdoing Capricorn, needing to balance with that softness and vulnerability and compassion and open heartedness of Cancer. And so Mars in Cancer is reminding us that, Pluto and Capricorn needs Cancer as we come out of this. And yeah, this is just the first of three oppositions between Mars and Pluto, but the other ones will happen in Leo and Aquarius. And that'll be January 3rd
Yep.
at 1 degree of Leo Aquarius, and then April 26th at 3 degrees. Is that what you have to? Did I get those dates right?
Yep, that
Okay.
is. And what's interesting, and that's when I went and looked at like previous dates and future dates, this is the only time I could find, like in the last 5 or 10 years at least, where there were three of them.
Right.
So
Right.
that does sort of add emphasis. So even this first Mars Pluto opposition at the full at the full moon, right? At the full moon, it,
New
at the
moon.
new moon, at the new moon it's like an opening salvo.
Right.
It's presenting
Right.
themes in a way.
And then it's kind of cool because again, like we need the balance of the sign polarity. So as Pluto is transitioning into Aquarius, and yes, it's had a couple of transitions into Aquarius, but this is the biggie because this is when Pluto stays in Aquarius for the next 20 years. So right as that's starting out, Mars and Leo saying we need Leo. Can't overdo Aquarius.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a whole nother conversation, isn't it? Which we've
Which
had.
we will be getting into. We have had, and we'll be talking more about that for sure.
Yeah. Um, I was trying to think what else do we want to bring up for today, or do you feel like we've covered enough?
Maybe we can check in and see if there's any questions
Yeah, if
from
you
our
have
people before we
questions,
close.
just please do put them in the chat, those of you that are here live. I know there's lots of great comments, but if you have questions and things that you want us to respond to now, just please put those in the chat. And Emily, while we're doing that, do you have any announcements? Anything coming up that you want to share?
Well, I do have a retreat, a mini retreat, half-day retreat in Santa Fe this Sunday, October 6th. Yes. And we've got 2 spots left in it. Um,
Okay.
so that's what I've got.
I'll put that link in the show notes too. And of
Thank
course, I'll
you.
get hold of you. How about the Aries South Node coming towards big old Neptune? Wait, Aries North Node.
Aries North Node.
You
Yep.
mean coming towards big old Neptune. Well, that's part of that whole Saturn Neptune conversation too.
And I think also part of really getting in touch with our dream and
Yeah.
knowing our power, North Node and Aries, our personal power to create our dream world and to really take action, Aries North Node, on our spiritual ideals and higher vision. And yeah, what's our big dream for the future?
Yeah, and as they shift again, we'll be talking a lot about Virgo Pisces. Difference between the new moon that affects the next 6 months and the one that affects it affects both. So the new,
Right.
yeah. go ahead, talk about that.
Well, so eclipses, we think about the 6 month cycle because we have eclipses, usually a pair, sometimes three eclipses every 6 months. So on the one hand, you can think about this solar eclipse as we're planting seeds that are going to develop over the next 6 months. And, we'll see some fruition from those planted seeds as we get the next set of eclipses. At the same time, it is a 19-year cycle as well. And so there's another story that's a bigger, slower, more slowly developing story that's opening. And of course, this depends, how much you can notice this in your own life. It really depends on how personal this eclipse might be. So like people who have a birthday within 24 hours of this eclipse is a life changer. Or if it's on your ascendant or a personal planet, can be a very big deal. In other words, if your ascendant is at or near 10 degrees of Libra, or your moon is at or near 10 degrees of Libra, or some other personal planet, you're going to feel this more personally, and you'll be able to trace that story. And again, look back to 2005. And just looking back to 2005 should probably show you whether or not you know astrology. You can look back into 2005 and say like, oh my God, that was a game changer. And then you'll know that this one is likely to be a big deal as well.
Okay. All right. Well, trying to think if I have anything else I want to summarize with, but I don't. I just think it's such a fascinating time. And there is so much opportunity if we focus on our own desires and dreams and really and don't get caught up in the here's the awful things and the awful future we could have. Because of course all things are possible, right? And we are at a very interesting, almost like a breaking point in history. And I know you probably have tracked what Daniel Gemario from the what does he call it now? The Turning of the Ages
Sure.
History School,
Mm-hmm.
what they say. I mean, possibly we're at the beginning and ending of a 26,000 year cycle.
Right, right. Big tipping point. And I think it's good to remember that Uranian message of things can turn around. And even in eclipse season, which carries a Uranian energy, where things can shift really quickly and you think it's going in one direction and it's the exact opposite. But to hold that as, we're not doomed to, we're not stuck in a particular story for eternity. Like things can turn around, and it does matter how we each contribute to that turnaround.
Yep.
And yeah, and just knowing, as we're in this Plutonian last hurrah and things can feel very dark and despairing, the eclipses just crank up the volume on everything else happening. So, this too shall pass is also good to keep in mind. Like the emotional intensity that you may be going through now is likely to calm down a bit once we come out of eclipse season.
That's a great message to leave it with. And that I think that's one of the gifts of astrology is just seeing the cycles and that things shift.
Things shift, things keep changing. Yeah.
Shift. Yeah. Well, thank you, Emily. I so appreciate you being here today. I always love our conversations. And I
Me
always
too.
lot and I get new perspectives and now the wheels are turning on some of the things that we've talked about.
Me too. And that went by so quickly.
It did. It always does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any big announcements. I have a couple of things in the works specifically to work with the 6 month period of retrogrades and focusing on the dream to prep for that Saturn Neptune. So if you're not on my newsletter list, that's what I recommend is that you get on that. And then also, Emily, your newsletter, you send out great emails for every new and full moon. And then of course you have your lunar circle where you do full unpacking of each new and full moon every month. And I think you also have some other benefits for that membership. Is that right?
Yeah. Usually paid subscribers, well, they can come to our live conversations. And also, I do some astrology classes. I did a big class on the Jupiter Saturn square that's free to paid subscribers. And I'm definitely going to be doing a class on Mars retrograde, how to find where that's happening in your chart, how to
Cool.
work with it. I just haven't put that on the calendar yet, but I will be doing that, and that will be free to my paid subscribers.
Great. Okay. I'll make sure that link is in the show notes as well, because I highly recommend it for people to, and it's a great way to really build your astrology knowledge is to be there on that regular basis and get those regular downloads. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again so much, Emily, and thank you all those of you who are here live, and thank you everybody who's listening to the podcast. And as always, I love to hear from you. So send me comments. You can go to my website and do that. You can do it through email if you have it. And I'll see you again soon.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Christine.